Look, every single market cycle, investors fall for the exact same lie. They start to believe that somehow risk has been totally eliminated, that this time it's different. Today, we're calling that lie the zero-risk illusion. And for a serious operator like you, understanding how to dismantle it isn't just an edge, it's an absolute requirement for survival.
So let's just dive right in with the big question, right? Why is it that the periods that feel the safest, when volatility just vanishes and our portfolios just keep climbing, why are those the exact periods that set the stage for the most brutal, catastrophic corrections? Well, the answer, it gets down to a fundamental misunderstanding of what risk actually is.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this down for you. We've got a clear path. First, we'll expose the illusion of safety. Then, we'll look at the architecture of the trap itself. Third, we'll cover what's happening to your brain on bull markets. And finally, and most importantly, I'm going to give you the operator's playbook for navigating all of it.
All right, let's get into it. Section 1, the illusion of safety. We're going to deconstruct the market's most dangerous, and honestly, its most seductive lie.
Okay, so here's the absolute core of the problem. When prices just seem to go up and corrections feel like a thing of the past, your brain, it takes this really dangerous shortcut. It starts to confuse the feeling of stability with the reality of safety. And that's the trap. It's a behavioral error, and it's the very mechanism that kills off the healthy resets that are supposed to keep a market honest. And look, this isn't just some dusty old theory. You can think of it as a law of the market. The economist Hyman Minsky, he built his entire framework on this idea. We call it the stability-instability paradox at Stoa. The longer things look stable, the more leverage, the more speculation, it just builds and builds underneath the surface. This guarantees that when volatility finally does return, it's going to be that much more violent. Stability, and you need to remember this, stability breeds instability.
And that right there brings us perfectly to Section 2, the architecture of the trap. See, this illusion, it doesn't just appear out of thin air. No. It has been actively, deliberately constructed. And as an operator, you have to understand who the architects are.
Think about it. For well over a decade now, the Federal Reserve, other central banks, they have systematically trained investors to ignore risk. Through things like zero interest rates and quantitative easing, which is really just a fancy way of saying they print money to buy assets, they've hammered home one single message over and over again. We will not let the market fail. We will always be there with a safety net. And that has fundamentally warped market psychology. There's actually a name for this. It's called moral hazard. It's what happens when you completely remove the consequences for making bad decisions. It's simple, right? If you believe someone's going to bail you out no matter what, you have absolutely zero incentive to manage your risk properly. You just take on more and more and more because you've been taught there's only an upside. And don't just take my word for it. This isn't theoretical. The proof is literally everywhere you look. We see it in these so-called zombie companies, businesses that are basically bankrupt but are kept on life support with an endless supply of cheap debt. We see it in junk bonds, where investors are getting paid almost nothing for taking on massive default risk. And we see it in record corporate debt being used not for growth or investment, but to pump up their own share prices with buybacks. So here's the bottom line, and you really need to let this sink in. You are not being paid to take this risk. The market has been engineered to make you feel safe while you are, in fact, picking up pennies in front of a steamroller. Believing in a safety net that might not be there when you actually need it, that is the fast track to blowing up.
So that leads us right into Section 3, your brain on bull markets. Because look, even if the Fed builds the trap, it's our own psychology that willingly walks us right into it. And understanding these internal biases, well, for an operator, it's non-negotiable.
This quote, man, it just hits the nail on the head. Market tops, they aren't financial events. They are psychological events. They happen when everybody becomes so convinced of their own genius that discipline gets thrown out the window. And caution starts to look like weakness. The damage is done long before that first big red candle. Now look, there are a ton of these behavioral traps, right? But for a serious operator, there are 3 that are just absolutely lethal in this kind of environment. First is herding. That's just following the crowd because it feels safe, even if it's right off a cliff. Second is a weird form of loss aversion. As your portfolio gets bigger, the fear of losing money feels abstract, so you take on even more risk. And third, and maybe the most dangerous, is optimism. The belief that what's been happening recently is just going to keep happening forever. That is the costliest mistake you can make. And what happens is,
These biases, they lock you into this perfectly predictable cycle of failure. You buy in on optimism, you get swept up in the thrill and the euphoria, and then you're forced to sell into the fear and the panic. It's this emotional roller coaster that guarantees you do the exact opposite of what you're supposed to do. The only thing that breaks this destructive cycle is a documented, repeatable process. Okay, so that leads us to the solution, to the antidote. Section 4, the operator's playbook. This isn't about trying to predict the future. It's about having a disciplined, rock-solid framework to navigate the uncertainty that is absolutely guaranteed to come.
This is the Stoa Risk Protocol. It's our documented framework for not just surviving, but thriving in chaos. First up, reframe risk. It never ever disappears, it just changes form. Low volatility is a huge warning sign that risk is building up somewhere else. 2. Diversify your sources. We don't just diversify assets, we diversify the actual sources of return. This insulates you from policy shocks. 3. Weaponize your cash. Cash isn't lazy, it's power. It's optionality. It's your ability to seize opportunities when everyone else is panic selling. 4. Recognize the Fed's limits. The Fed can influence markets, sure, but it cannot repeal the laws of the business cycle. And 5. Redefine your time horizon. We measure success across full market cycles, not by the day-to-day noise.
So if you take away only one thing from this, let it be this. The market doesn't punish ambition. It doesn't even really punish greed. It punishes complacency. It punishes the belief that risk has been conquered. And that zero-risk illusion, it's the ultimate form of complacency. Your job as an operator is to see it, respect it, and systematically manage it.
If you've made it this far, you're not just curious, you're serious. And that's exactly who Stoa was built for.
So, here's the deal. We don't just accept anyone. We run on an application-only system because we only work with people who are genuinely ready to operate at the next level.
So if you want to stop wasting hours chasing noise and instead run a proven, documented process that actually gets results in less than 90 minutes a day, then apply now.
There are limited seats, and once they're filled, they're gone for the quarter. Click the link in the description, fill out the short application, and let's see if you're a fit. If you're watching this, my guess is you already know you should.